We're making a programme for Radio 4 on the meaning of life.
Oh, no.
What is this programme?
We're
You're talking
investigating the meaning of life. Obviously, we've got to come to you, man.
For me, it's relationships. That's where I get the most pleasure and joy. And if you can give something to someone or enrich someone's life, I think that's a beautiful thing to do.
The Christian religion was an incredible imaginative set of concepts.
Who knows? Who knows?
What do you say to all those people who are convinced that their life does have a meaning?
Let them enjoy their
delusion.
Yes, that's all they have.
We're standing in Soho Square in central London. There's like a quadrangle. I must have walked around this square thousands of times, usually in pursuit of pleasure. But it also reminds me of my time at Oxford, where I studied philosophy. And I studied philosophy because I believed that the great philosophers would tell me the meaning of life. In this episode, we're going to talk to philosophers about what their view is. Philosophy doesn't really seem to get much done. It's a subject that really, in the past 60, 70, 100 years, has been knocked off its perch by science. Do philosophers themselves still find that in the abstract contemplation of thought and being itself, they can discover some meaning?
The need for a meaning in our lives, I think, is partly, or perhaps even largely, catalyzed by our sense of our mortality. And to that extent, it's actually a sign of human frailty.
I first read John Gray in the early 2000s when he published a book called Straw Dogs, Thoughts on Humans and Other Animals. And it was a book that struck a very powerful and dissonant chord with me. Here was a thinker kicking against the pricks of the established and orthodox ideology of liberal humanism, who was saying that there's no progress in life, who was saying that humans really needed to bite down on the fact that we have canine teeth and are just like any other animal. I found John's thought bracing, but it also made me feel quite unhappy and unlike I would find any meaning in my miserable, animalish life.
I think the need for meaning can become destructive and tyrannical in a variety of ways. Politically, it can lead to types of violence and of oppression which serve the need for meaning of the oppressors. In other words, by forcing other human beings to take part in our stories, the stories we have of our lives or of where we are in the historical narrative, we somehow validate those stories. By killing them, we validate the meaning of our own lives. That's dangerous. But even in individual lives, I think it can be dangerous. I mean, I think asking ourselves the question, how can I make my life meaningful, is the wrong way around. What we should do is ask ourselves the question, what gives us the deepest or the most enduring or the most intense satisfaction? And then if we pursue things in that way and aren't too narrowly obsessed by our projects, we'll find meaningful episodes in our lives. Meaning to most human beings, I think, and certainly to me, comes in almost by the way of epiphanies rather than
a sort of steady, consistent, this is meaningful.
No, this is meaningful.
This is meaningful too.
And I've got more meaning now than I had last year.
Yeah.
But I think we can loosen the straitjacket of human solipsism a bit by looking at other animals, looking at the natural world, and even the human world, like cities, from an angle which doesn't demand from it that it gives us a meaning. And oddly enough, if you do that, you'll probably find you have bags of epiphanies of various kinds. And of course, what the epiphanies give you is not a proposition like meaning. You don't say, well, what I learned as I was walking down the Strand the other day, with the sun slanting down and doing fantastic shade. What I learned was, the whole point is, you haven't learned anything of that sort, but you may be released somewhat from this quintessentially human angst. Because it'll be less important to you to demand that your life or that of other human beings uniquely in the cosmos have a special meaning.
Here I am in a, well, frankly, rather Uranus alley in Soho. And I'm still puzzling over this idea of picking up the meaning in life in these kind of chance little epiphanies, the way that John Gray describes. I've been buying my cigars in this shop for many, many years, and they've given me great pleasure. You, sir, who work in this shop, is that the meaning of your life?
Seeing you is always good.
Meaningful.
Meaningful.
Because I
yes.
always come on like this, don't I?
Yes.
But at a personal level, what's the meaning of your life?
Does life have a meaning?
I don't know. Is that your position? Is it one of skepticism?
I don't know.
About that very
I mean,
question?
people have been looking for the answer to this one for thousands of years.
But I used to find that when I had a large glass of Scotch whisky, or perhaps 7, that it didn't bother me anymore.
The meaning of life
Yeah,
didn't bother
I
you.
was completely untroubled by the meaning of life when I had a few drinks inside me. Do you think that's why we drink, to quell our philosophic yearnings?
Maybe it enhances them in some ways with some people.
Yeah.
Spend a bit of time in a pub and people who would normally not have an opinion suddenly think they have the answers.
Maybe that's what we're doing in our very ordinary lives when we go around to art galleries or go shopping. That can't be the kind of meaning in life that John Gray's talking about. Can we prescribe ourselves meaning, as religion does, in controlled, measured portions? Will that work? I asked the philosopher Alain de Botton for his view.
What religion gives us is not merely something to believe in, it's a set of activities and practices which imbue daily life with a kind of purposefulness, not a grand meaning, but a kind of direction. And what's striking, for example, is how religions divide up days, mark out special moments, and point out sort of things of interest and digest experiences for us. A lot of art is doing this as well, and the class is now taking care of the meaning side of life in the way that religion does. In theory, art is very well qualified to do that. At the same time, I think the way that we approach art is actually, on the whole, quite scholastic, quite academic in slightly negative sense. It doesn't, at an institutional level, encourage us to respond in a kind of neo-religious way to it. If you showed up at the Tate Modern and went down on your knees and started crying in front of a Rothko and said, I don't know what the hell this is about, and I'm lost and confused, etc., you'd be ushered out by the security guards and treated as a mad person. Culture, though on the surface sold to us as a replacement for the meaning found in religion, is actually close up quite scared of being probed and used in the way that the religious used to use religion, or still do use religion. And this is, I think, an enormous and sort of historic missed opportunity. And I'm very sympathetic to this, as I see it, 19th century ideal that you find in people like Matthew Arnold, John Ruskin, and others, that art is there to take up the slack of our confusion and distress for those who can't cope and at the same time can't believe. And that, I think, encompasses probably most of us.
Well, I believe the mind and the body are the same thing. They're just the same thing, right? So if you see the body rot, then the mind clearly rots as well. It's both literally and metaphorically a no-brainer. I would love God to come to me in the bath. It would be great. It would give my life such purpose and meaning. Hey guys, have you got a second? Oh, go on. Your haughty look. I see consciousness as the operating system of the human body that's got above itself. It doesn't impress me, it never has.
She's absolutely amazing. She is Andy Osho!
One of the most important things is being present.
Andy Osho is a writer, comedian and broadcaster. She spoke to us from her home in Los Angeles.
One thing that you get, if the comedy works, people are very much brought into the present. You give them that experience, and that alleviates the stress and the anxiety or whatever it is that's going on in your life. So I think that's one of the biggest things that people get out of seeing a live performance of any kind.
Alain de Botton seems to feel that if we did manage to treat art in a more sacerdotal fashion, that would kind of give us more meaning in life. You know, secularists often say, "Oh, I love the great music of Bach and the religious painting of Caravaggio or Titian, but I don't really like the beliefs." And it seems to me that that's missing the whole point. This art is devotional. It's got its eyes fixed on the eternal. And a wholly human art, like, Rothko's abstract expressionism, it may speak of the ineffable, but it doesn't really give us that much succor. No, I sometimes feel that little epiphanies come much more easily when we're laughing.
Yeah, particularly if you're able to laugh at difficult things, it changes the sort of frequency that you're experiencing. So rather than it causing guilt or anxiety or shame or distress or whatever, it's actually causing joy. Not that the thing is making you feel joyful, but the fact that you can maybe change the way you look at something. Because, I think when people write stuff, whether it's music or books, they're conduits for something. So being in a space where you can receive from wherever it comes from, inspiration, your muse, whatever, that's a very special thing. It's just you're channeling universal energy. And, I think some people, if they were religious, they would call it God. And other people would just say, I just had a good idea. It doesn't really matter what you think it is. That's what you're tuning into. All these ideas that already exist out there. And you as a writer or a creator, you're the filter so that it comes differently through you than it would through somebody else. So you write it down and you put it out in the world because this thing just is calling to be birthed.
I sort of go along a bit with what Andy Osho is saying, but my problem as I get older, and I don't know how many other people feel this way, is that I increasingly feel that nothing's really funny twice. I mean, it's just the same joke over again. And maybe that's the problem with philosophy as well. You can't really pick and mix from it, because when you go back to the same little aluminium container of thought again, the philosophy's a bit stale. Mary Warnock seems to think, though, that religious traditions can provide us with some of the philosophical sustenance that we need.
I mean, belief to me entails believing that what it says in the Gospels actually happened. And I'm afraid I don't. But I do believe that the Christian religion was an incredible imaginative set of concepts, and that I think I still do adhere to. I am absolutely astonished at how Jesus Christ was such an absolute moral rebel and such a revolutionary figure. The busting of conventions and had in that case an extraordinary effect. Although I love Christianity, but I just don't go along with its dualism.
You're uneasy with mind matter.
Well, post-Darwin, we're all prepared to believe that we are animals, and what differentiates human beings from other animals is their brains. The fact that their language users seems to be completely crucial. So I don't believe that you can detach the mind from the body, because I think the brain is accountable for what we speak of as mind. And this is very much Wittgenstein, Austin, the 1950s philosophy.
For the non-philosophically literate, we could characterise phenomenology, these philosophers like Sartre, Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, as privileging again the fact of human experience, but still being interested in metaphysics. What they perhaps didn't share with the analytical philosophers was what's called the linguistic turn, the idea that simply by examining language we can somehow find answers. In Wittgenstein's case, there are no answers to the big questions, but somehow the phenomenologists do have this metaphysical penumbra to their thinking. They seem to touch against the ineffable, don't they?
Yes. I think there's still a mass of interesting philosophy that somebody's going to do about the connection between human values and language.
I love talking to Mary Warnock. It's fantastic to be in the presence of, as it were, a practical philosopher, somebody who takes ideas and applies them through social and political policies to the real world. That certainly seems a deeply meaningful thing to do, but it also seems to me part of the incredible drive for legibility, clarity in our culture. And yet, maybe meaning isn't clear. Maybe meaning lies in the obscure and the mysterious. We're making a program for Radio 4 on the meaning of life.
Oh.
Is that the
Well,
meaning of your life?
that's one version. But my gut just went, aye. What is that? Yes. Yeah, making noises. That's what I do. Yeah. Ask me the question again.
Okay, what is the meaning of life?
Who knows? Who knows?
Rather than the world being fully intelligible in terms of what we can see and feel and know, what epiphanies of meaning do is suggest vast realms of unknowability or of mystery. And for me at least, meaning is nearly always connected with mystery. I think one of the false moves in the way many people, including me in the past, have thought, is to think that something becomes meaningful when we can articulate it in some way, especially in a proposition or an argument or a theory.
So you think religion, and particularly Christianity, is right about that in a way?
About mystery.
Yeah,
Yes,
and the ineffability of meaning.
Except that, as the philosopher Michael Oakeshott once said to me, but the trouble with these Christians, John, is they've all got theologies. In other words, they try and work up the intimation of mystery
into some sort of, not only theology, but theodicy as well.
Theodicy, so
they're back in the same camp as the meaning mongers again.
And the meaning mongers are the meaning mongers who see history as the story of the life of a single subject, humanity, humankind. The Greeks didn't think like that. The Chinese didn't think like that.
So you're bracketing the question, and you're saying, well, we're not going to answer that in the terms that Western philosophy might ordinarily have tabled it. We're going to acknowledge that it is a human, individual, existential impulse that we're discussing here.
It may be species universal, though, In other words, when I started, it was not so much psychological, but almost biological, to say that it's a part of our biology, and maybe of other sentient species in other parts of the universe, if there are any, that when they come to an awareness of their mortality, they also generate in themselves somehow a need for narratives to palliate that mortality or make it tolerable to them. So it's psychologistic in that sense.
But would you go further and say, concentrate wholly on dealing, like Montaigne, dealing wholly with the question of your death and subordinate questions of meaning to that, except when these epiphanies break out, and feel blessed that you have those moments when you at least have a flickering apprehension of how contingent your existence is.
It's not so much, I think the intimations of meaning are not so much intimations of immortality, but intimations of a kind of rupture in time in which mortality doesn't matter.
It seems a bit rich to tell us that our mortality doesn't matter and we shouldn't be concerned about it. It's the sense of rapidly approaching death that tends to drive people to try and find what the meaning of their lives has been. I wonder what sort of belief system could genuinely help us to not care about the fact that we definitely are mortal beings and are constantly aware of the prospect of our own deaths. Alain de Botton again.
My own private view is that what should be replacing the theological argument is psychoanalysis. I think psychoanalysis is the greatest possible story about who we are and what our options are on this planet.
If I was asked the meaning of life when I was 10 years old, it would have been horses. Just the whole thought of being part of the kingdom in which horses lived. And then there was sex, of course, which is another huge meaning of life. And what's left in the end, in my case, is this desire to find things out and tell other people.
In the 19th century, when people start to wonder whether life has any meaning or not, it's a question that's raised against the backdrop of the retreat of religion. And I think it's the wrong question to ask.
What makes me feel certain that my life is worth living is if I've got a project. I must have something going on, sort of ticking on in my mind that I've got to do this and I must do that.
If you believe that we're here for a reason that suits the bandwidth of ordinary consciousness, then you're going to be permanently struck by the idea that everything is meaningless.
The meaning of life is what somebody who's living the life makes it significant, because life is not an abstract thing. There's no life that isn't lived by somebody.
I think we just have to start with a relatively clean slate, which is there is no meaning in a biological, theological, or other sense. We are not here for a purpose. We're clinging to the rock for all sorts of biological dynamics. Look, my own philosophy is a background sense of depression, which is unarguable and true, mixed with an intense pragmatism about today and what we might achieve today. So we are erecting matchsticks on the seashore. They will be wiped away. The best we can do is just arrange those matchsticks in as humane and interesting way as possible.
Just my phone tongue call. Yeah.
Ask not who the bell tolls for, it tolls for thee. So, getting on the couch is going to make it possible for me to ignore the irritating mobile phone calling me to another world. I somewhat doubt it. Whenever I lie on the couch and project my voice into the thin ether that I suspect lies between the ears of the psychoanalyst I can't see, I hear nothing. I look into that abyss and it looks back at me and then usually charges me for the experience. So, where has this great kind of meaning hole in our lives come from? Is it that religion once provided us with a sort of total explanation of the world? Or is it that our search for meaning is inbuilt into our psyches? John Gray again.
In the Renaissance, there were many theories of the multiverse.
That's
and
true.
if you go back to the Hindus, theories of countless millions, trillions of universes. So, I mean, there was a deep chaos that gave in the Roman Empire an almost sort of epistemic chaos, or cognitive, where it gave birth, or at least helped Christianity to become what it did become, a universal religion. And if you look back 500 years before, there was probably something similar in India. So there are some sort of anthropological truths, but how they play out depends on historical circumstances.
And what do you say to all those people who are convinced that their life does have a meaning by virtue of the fact that they belong to a species that is progressing towards, either a kind of local or even a kind of universal domination of the material universe with this astonishing science? What do you say to those people?
Well, first of all, I don't try and deconvert them or convert them. No, absolutely not. Let them enjoy their
delusion.
Yes. That's all they have. Without it, what would they be? What would they do? The people I write for in my books are the people who already have doubts. I'm not interested at all in altering the belief system of progressives or other secular religionists. They seem to me to be absurd. They seem to me to be very far from anything that could be considered truthful, let alone true.
And with no truth, no meaning.
Well, meaning for them depends on an absence of truth. But good luck to them.
Have you got a minute?
Yeah, I've got a minute. Oh, that's very kind.
How often do you come down here in the tube to play your harp?
About 3 days a week.
Does your life have much meaning, do you feel?
Oh, music has given me a tremendous form of expression.
The philosopher Schopenhauer said music was the greatest of the arts because it's just emotion.
Oh, yeah.
It's unmediated.
Exactly.
It makes you feel things through its own creation.
It has different effects on different people, but what a good busker does, they reach out to people.
Will you even see somebody coming off that escalator over there and be able to modulate your playing in
To a
some way
certain
to affect
extent.
them? Yeah. So you're like throwing out meaning into their lives.
You can't play to yourself. You have to play to the audience.
You have to be focused on an audience.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for your time. We want to go eastbound. We'll find it. Just like in life, we're a bit lost. So where the hell do we get? Weird, isn't it? Where's the eastbound platform?
It's arguable in a way that our foremothers and forefathers got great satisfaction and sense of meaning in being engaged in a kind of wholesale cultural transmission from generation to generation. And I slightly think there is a sort of sense of futility about that enterprise in our culture at the moment. Would
Yes,
you agree?
I would agree, actually. I do agree very much. And it goes along with a sort of absolute cliche of thinking of becoming rich as more important than anything else. I mean, almost taken for granted that that's what you've got to do.
The economy sells us the idea that the way to have a good life is to profit and to compete with others in the marketplace. But another extremely and far more important part of human nature wants to serve. And the impulse to serve others goes nowhere at the moment other than in children. It's the only mission that we can publicly allow ourselves. But of course, what we should really serve is our fellow human beings. We can do that in a military context if the country is threatened. But the real challenge is, might we do that, when there isn't some existential threat to our survival? We haven't found a way of harnessing that appetite.
The philosopher Karl Marx said that in the interregnum between two social systems, the strangest phenomena may arise. One of our problems, it seems to me, as a society at the moment is this idea of transmission. What can we pass on to the next generation? We don't know. So maybe this search for meaning is really about a loss of certainty.
I'm aware that things like religion try and operate on a mass scale, but for all sorts of reasons, these options aren't open to modern people. And we're fated to make little radio programs and write little books and other things, and that's a good enough way to spend the day.
I'm inquiring into the meaning of life. Next week, faith.
I'm fascinated by unbelievers who find it difficult in the same way that some believers find it difficult.
That all obtains as long as you suspend disbelief. But if you don't, then none of it obtains.
I agree, but why do you have to suspend? Self's Search for Meaning was presented by Will Self and produced by Kerry McCarthy. And Episode 1, Science, is